Hi, my name is Miranda, and I am doing my final project. So, the least restrictive environment. Students will be able to learn in the least restrictive environment. What that means is if a student has an IEP or the student receives services, which when the student has an IEP, they are to learn in classes with other general education staff and students. So if a student is pulled for a class, or if a student is in an IIC classroom, the student is still able to learn in a general education classroom with a general education teacher. So students also need to have services, resource, and outside services. So outside services are like PT, OT, speech, those types of things, adaptive PE. And resource is a resource classroom. So if a student is below grade level, or if a student is not doing so well from the scores that were given as the scores I'll talk about later, then the student will be able to have resource. And for different districts and different schools, they work differently. So for example, like the student can go for ELA. The student needs resource in ELA. The first 45 minutes, since it's a 90-minute block period, first 45 can be in a resource classroom with the special education teacher and other students, and then the next 45 minutes, the student will be able to go to the regular ELA class and join in and do what they're doing with support from a special education staff member as a teacher or a para. In the IEP team makes decisions together for the student. So the team is all the services, if there's OT, PT, speech, adaptive PE, and other part of the team from the parents, their outside services, and then the parents themselves, the special education teacher, the principal sometimes will be in that, assistant principal, and the student may be asked questions as well. So why is assessments process described as a cycle, and what are the components of the special education assessment process? So there are 4 different phases, and in those 4 different phases, they're broken down into different concepts. So phase 1 is kind of like the pre-testing stage. So the student may not be doing so well in a class, let's say in ELA class. So the teacher notices that. Once the teacher notices that, the teacher will make modifications in the classroom, accommodations in the classroom, for that student to be successful with that assignment. Now, if the student is still not doing well, then there will be testing done for the student, because the student isn't doing well with the accommodation modifications, so the student needs additional help. So the team decided for the qualification for the student. So that means the team that I had mentioned before will decide what the student needs in the classroom, in the general education classroom, and then if the student needs to have a resource classroom. And then for phase 2, the determination of eligibility of IAP, which is the individual assessment plan. So there's 3 main topics that they look into, and one is address the reason for the student being referred. So why is the student needing to be looked at? Why does the student need to be tested? What are the areas that need to be tested? And then focus on area relevant to education. So like I said, what does the student need to be tested for? What subject? 3, provide information needed for final decisions. So what's going to help the student best? And then there's 3 main concerns for the student while evaluating. So the student abilities. What can the student do best? What is the student good at? What does the student like to do? What motivates the student? Those types of things. and general education curriculum. So how well does a student do in the general education classroom? What help does that student need? What is the student going to do well at? Student needs, the physical and emotional. So is the student going to need breaks throughout the day because the student gets really frustrated on certain assignments? Is the counselor going to need to talk to the student, meet with them once a week or every other week? So that kind of deal for physical and emotional. And decision making, the result of the student. So what's going to be best for the student? What's going to make that student be successful in the classroom, with or without help? Okay, phase 3 is the IEP itself. So the teacher or the person who is reaching out to the parents has 30 days to determine what the IEP is going to be. If the student qualifies for the IEP or if the student doesn't qualify for the IEP. IEP must be in effect for services, so students cannot receive extra support or accommodation modifications until the IEP is set in stone. And once the student has an IEP, there will be yearly meetings. So that means that each year on that date of the IEP, the staff, the parents, and their outside services, if they have any, sometimes the student will meet and decide if the student still needs the IEP, what changes are going to be made, and the goals, talk about goals. The goals are what is the student gonna do? How is the student gonna be better? What is the staff gonna do to help the student achieve those goals in the classroom? So there's 8 key items in the IEP, and those 8 key are levels of achievement. So how is the student going to be successful? What are they going to do? Measurable goals. So like I said, they're going to make goals. So they could be in writing, they can be in reading, it could be in math, it could be in behavior, it could be for PE. So any of those goals can be made. Speech can make a goal, OT can make a goal. How is the student going to achieve the goal? So how is this, that in the IEPs be written what the student is going to do to meet that goal. Related services are the PT, OT, APE, speech, all of those types of people. Involvement in the classroom. How is the student going to be in the class? Does the student do well in a small class? Does the student do well in a big class? Does the student need to be sitting in the front? Does the student need to be sitting in the back? How is that student reacting to others in the classroom? Number 5 is state the district procedures. So knowing what the school does. Number 6, how to measure goals. Like I said, how is the student going to achieve the goals? 7, transition. So like from elementary to middle school, what's they're going to be to help the student transition, because I know sometimes it's hard for students to be in a new place, have new faces, have new teachers. And same thing from middle school to high school. What's going to help that student? What's going to be presented for that student to be successful in that transition? Social stories, those types of things. And 8, behavior needs. So if a student is not able to control themselves in the classroom, what are we going to do to help that student? And then there's also the parental agreement, which is part of the IEP. So as the school, make sure parents and school agree. So parents and school need to be on the same page in order for the IEP to be written. And everything that's given to the parents must be in their native language, or if sign language, if one of the parents is hard of hearing. So there needs to be an interpreter. And if the student speaks another language, then there needs to be an interpreter for that language as well. And if parents don't agree, there's a process. And that process is if the parents don't agree with what the school is doing, first step is the mediation. So they meet in a meeting with a mediator. This person's on neither side, and If that can't be resolved, there's a due process in having a hearing in the court. So if they're still not from that mediation, if they're not agreeing, then they go to the court, and then the final decision is made by the district court. So what's going to happen in the IEP and what's right, what's wrong, and all of those types of things. Okay, and the last phase is phase 4. Phase 4 is a program implementation and education. So implementing of an IEP and ongoing monitoring. So how is the student going to achieve the goals throughout the day or week or month? And how is the person knowing if they're achieving it or not? What kind of data are they going to provide? And usually the staff, the case manager, will provide the information to parents through email, quarterly, and then, like I said, the yearly IEP. And then every 3 years there's evaluation. So is the current modifications, accommodations meeting the goals? Is that helping the student? If not, what other things need to be done to help that student? And then parents have access to the IEP always. When requested, the school needs to give it to them. State and district test mentioned in IEP. So if there's any accommodations, modifications in the during those testing periods. So 5 ways to encourage parents during the process, and that is have parents access the records so parents can have them at any time to see where their student is at. Be included through the IEP process and making sure students or parents are involved in the process of making the IEP. 3 is notification to parent of meeting and what's in it about. Who's attending the meeting? What's the meeting going to be about? Is it going to be a re-eval? Is it going to be talking about just the regular IEP itself and what's going to be in it? 4 is complaint procedure, which I talked about in the last slide, the mediation and due process. And then 5, the discipline procedures, which is if the student is suspended more than 10 days, which is a manifestation, what is the next steps going to be for the next placement for the student? And then on my last slide, how percentile rank, standard scores, and Staney's relate together. So the percentile rank is where out of 100, and where the student falls is out of 100. So what that student is going to be ranked at. So if that student's ranked at 10 out of 100, that means there's 10 student. He's a 10th student or she's a 10th student, and he or she is better than the rest of the 10 students, but not any better from 11 to 100. So 10 usually is resource, 31 is students in their general education classroom with an IEP, and then 50 is average. And an example of a test that would be given is Scantron. For standard scores, comparing the performance of the same individual on 2 different measures as long as a raw score distribute of the measure or similar. Report norms for various age or grade groups within the total. Standardized sample. So this is an example of an IQ test. The student will take an IQ test, and that student is measured along with other students in that same age and grade. Staney's is divided into 9 segments, which is a range of performance, and it has a deviated score as well as the standard scores. And how they're all similar is their percentile and standard scores are based out of 100. All kids are taking the same test no matter the age and grade. Determine where the student places with score compared with other students the same age and grade. And there's a deviated score, like I said before, between the standard and the Staney's. And then they're all 3 a composite score of all the students to compare scores. And they can compare scores nationally or districtly. So that is my slide and final. Thank you very much.